It was August 26, 1819, and we are located at Rosenau Palace in the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. On this very day, Albert, the future Prince Consort of the United Kingdom, was born. Albert would go on to marry the Queen of the United Kingdom, Victoria, and would become one of her closest advisors. But yet he always stood in his famous wife's shadow and died at the relatively young age of 42. Albert's early years were marked by the turbulent marriage of his parents, who both had extramarital affairs and which ended in a divorce. His father was Ernest I, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and his mother was Princess Louise of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. Their lives, marriage, and divorce will be the topic of this video, starting off with his father. Ernst Anton Karl Ludwig, or Ernest Anthony Charles Louis in English, was born shortly after the new year 1784. His own parents were Francis, who would become the Duke of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld in 1800, and Countess Augusta Reuss of Ebersdorf. Ernest's parents were married in 1777. For his father, it was his second marriage, after his first wife died only 7 months into their marriage. Ernest's father was deeply in love with Augusta, even when he was still married to his first wife. He purchased this painting of Augusta for 4 times the price it was worth, only to call it his. Ernest, who would later succeed in his father's duchy, was his parents' eldest son. This time would come sooner than everybody thought, when in 1803 Ernest was just 19, his father became gravely ill. Ernest took over some of his duties and succeeded as Ernest III in 1806 after his father died. But when Ernest came to the throne, he was not able to actually reign, as his duchy was occupied by the French. Ernest participated in the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt, in which Saxony and Prussia fought against the French. The battle ended in a massive loss for the Prussians and Saxons, and another major victory for Napoleon. After the humiliating defeat, Ernest accompanied Prussian King Frederick William III back to his headquarters. After the treaties of Tilsit, Russian Tsar Alexander I demanded that Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld should be elevated back to the rank of a duchy and given back to Ernest. Tsar Alexander I was the brother-in-law of Ernest's sister Juliane, who was married to Alexander's brother Constantine. In 1813, Ernest sided with the Prussians, who alongside other European powers were fighting against Napoleon. He became a general in their army and personally fought in the Battle of Lutzen in May 1813. The battle ended in a French victory and resulted in roughly 50,000 casualties. The Battle of Leipzig took place in October of that same year. Ernest would participate in the so-called Battle of the Nations, as it was also commonly called. 560,000 men fought in Leipzig from October 16th to October 19th. This battle ended in a victory for the coalition. For the rest of the Napoleonic Wars, Ernest commanded the 5th Army Corps. Following the defeat of Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo, which was fought in June 1815, Ernest received 450 square kilometers of land as gratitude for his service in the military. This area would later become known as the Principality of Lichtenberg. Ernest sold the land to Prussia in 1834 for the price of 2 million thaler. He used the money to buy Castle Greinburg, which is located in what is today Austria, and other estates. In addition, he supported the rebuilding of his duchy, which was left partially damaged after the long years of the Napoleonic Wars, and gave it a constitution. He was a great supporter of the arts and science. Ernest therefore arranged the building of theaters in Gotha and Coburg. Now before we continue with Ernest's life, let us shift our attention to Prince Albert's mother, Princess Louise of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. Louise was born shortly before Christmas 1800 to her parents Augustus, the Duke of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, and Louise Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Schwerin. Louise's birthplace is Castle Friedenstein, which is located in Gotha. She was named in honor of her maternal grandmother, Princess Louise of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. Louise's mother did not recover from childbirth and died 11 days after her birth on January 4, 1801. Her mother was only 21 at the time of her death, and Louise was the only child she ever had. Louise grew up at the court of her father after the tragic death of her mother. The young princess's father remarried in 1802 to Princess Caroline Amalie of Hesse-Kassel, a descendant of the King of Denmark and Norway. The couple never had any children of their own, but Caroline became a devoted stepmother to young Louise. Louise would grow up to become a beautiful young woman, short in stature, vivacious, and intelligent. On December 20th, 1816, a day before Louise's 16th birthday, she became engaged to the 17 years older Ernest. Their wedding followed on July 31st, 1817, and was like most marriages back then, an arranged marriage, only for political interest from both families. But nevertheless, surviving letters from Louise show that despite the huge age gap between her and her husband, she was deeply in love with the good-looking Ernest. Shortly after their marriage, Louise wrote to a good friend of hers, "To tell you how happy and contented and joyous I am, if one loves an angel, one's master and husband, one is so much softer and more tender, more susceptible and warmer also for friendship." And for Ernest's side, it seemed like he returned those feelings at the beginning of their marriage. Shortly after the wedding, Louise became pregnant, and on June 21st, 1818, their first child, also named Ernest, was born. A year later, their second child, Francis Charles Augustus Albert Emmanuel, was born at Rosenau Castle, the family's country home. Their second son was known as Albert in the family and would later become Albert the Prince Consort. Years after the birth of Prince Albert, rumors started to spread that Albert was not Ernest's son. It was claimed that the real father of the future consort was the court chamberlain, Baron von Mayern. Soon after the birth of both of their sons, Ernest and Louise's initially happy marriage began to fall apart. A lady-in-waiting to Louise told Ernest that Louise was in love with a Count Solms. Ernest took this seriously despite Louise denying those rumors. He began to watch every step of Louise's. And for Ernest, he soon began taking many mistresses of his own. In the summer of 1824, Louise began an affair with a young army officer named Alexander von Hanstein. Upon receiving the news of Louise's infidelity, Ernest demanded a separation. It did not take long for Louise to pack her things and leave Coburg and her sons forever in September of 1824, despite alleged reconciliation attempts. It was decided that Louise should settle in St. Wendel in the Principality of Lichtenberg, the piece of land Ernest had received for his service during the Napoleonic Wars. She was forbidden from ever seeing or even receiving paintings from her sons, which deeply saddened her. She never recovered from the separation of her children. Louise never denied nor admitted the affair with Hanstein, and she and Ernest were divorced in 1826. Louise most likely could have had a more outgoing and perhaps flirtatious reputation than her much older husband. It is also unclear today if Ernest really had that many mistresses like many claim. Ernest also frequently left Coburg and might have therefore neglected his wife, leaving her lonely. but it is safe to say that both might have made mistakes from their sides. Shortly after the divorce, Louise married Hanstein. In order to marry her, Hanstein was made Count of Pulzig by the Duke of Saxe-Altenburg. They lived in St. Wendel, where Louise became a popular figure, being much loved by the people there. Until this day, the statue of Louise stands in front of the town hall of St. Wendel. Ernest, shortly after the divorce, received the Duchy of Gotha after the previous duke died without any heirs. He was therefore known from that point on as Ernest I, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He supported farming, trading, and the infrastructure. Louise and her second husband continued to live in St. Wendel for the next few years, but Louise's health began to deteriorate. In early 1831, the couple traveled to Paris, where Louise received a shocking diagnosis that she was suffering from cervical cancer. Louise was bound to bed for her last months of life and never returned home. She died on August 30th, 1831, at the age of only 30. A year after the death of his former wife, Ernest married for a second time, this time to his niece, Duchess Marie of Württemberg. This made Marie stepmother to her cousins, Ernest and Albert. Despite the strange family ties, Marie and her husband's sons would enjoy a lifelong happy relationship with them, even becoming the godmother of Albert's children, Victoria and Edward. Ernest and Marie never had any children of their own, but Ernest in addition had 4 illegitimate children. He died on January 29, 1844. Prince Albert loved both of his parents despite their tumultuous marriage. He and his brother arranged to have their mother's body returned back to Coburg to be buried in the same mausoleum as their father after his death. Ernest's second wife, Marie, moved to Gotha, where she lived until her death in 1860.